Good morning and welcome to the show. I'm Jonathan Rouis and I'll be your moderator. I'm a partner here at RBT CPAs and former chairman of the Sullivan County Legislature. I'm joined by Jen George, a partner with RBT. She serves as Director of Compliance and our technical guru. We also expect to have with us a very special guest, Dutchess County Executive Mark Molinaro. Mark has been at the forefront in developing a comprehensive plan to maximize the impact of the ARPA funding in Dutchess County and has created a model for all to explore. I can't wait for Mark to share his insights. Again, the past week, there have been quite a few updates on the ARPA program. Jen is going to go through a review of the latest developments shortly. Just a few housekeeping items. The previous shows are available on the RBT website at www.rbtcpas.com. We plan on changing things up this week a little. We know Mark is a couple of minutes late, but he does have a commitment to that we don't want him to miss at 9. So once he jumps on, we're going to jump right in with him, and we'll spend the last 15 minutes with a Q&A. So please use your chat function to submit your questions. I think Mark is joining us as we speak. I'll give him a chance to get loaded on here. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
Morning. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Very good. So we just gave a brief intro. We know you've got a very important commitment we don't want you to miss at 9. So we're going to jump in with you right to start things off, and I'll let you go right at 9 so you can do what you have to do.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, Dutchess County is going to be receiving a once-in-a-lifetime capital infusion of about $57 million in the ARPA funding. Was this a dream come true for you?
No, it was the culmination of a lot of work. Keep in mind that since the onset of the pandemic, counties like Dutchess, we are the front line of public health response, and we were in this case. At the same time that we were being asked to do an enormous amount of new work, which again, it's our responsibility from testing and establishing those testing requirements to the distribution of PPE, to the response to those populations who needed direct assistance. County governments in the state of New York were on that front line of response. So massive new expense. At the same time, and you all know as well as anyone, we also saw an enormous reduction in revenue, mostly sales tax receipts. And so those two things, compounded to really make a real challenge, a fiscal challenge, certainly for communities like ours, and counties across America are responsible for public health response, 9,300 public health departments across the country, 1,000 hospitals administered by county governments across the country. And so we made this effort. The National Association of Counties and counties like ours worked very, very hard to get Congress to pay attention to the need to state and local aid and flexible state and local aid. And I reinforce flexible because we lost general revenue. We needed the ability to restore that general revenue to commit to general government obligations. So we advocated for this for months and months. I am the first to tell you that while the House of Representatives and the Democrat majority was steadfast in support of state and local aid, Senator Schumer was in support of state and local aid, but the Republicans that governed and were the majority in the United States Senate didn't want to make that commitment. And so there were moments where we thought we were close, and then our hopes were dashed. And so it's a long answer to a short question. No dream come true, but a lot of work culminated with the House and the Senate agreeing with the president on this large American Rescue Plan that includes state and local aid. A good portion of that state and local aid has great flexibility, which is what we asked for. And as I've said to many will ask, it's an enormous amount of money. I would admit it is more than we lost in revenue. That's without question, actually almost twice what we lost in revenue. And so, this comes at a time where we can put it on the ground and hopefully continue to expand economic opportunity and support for families, residents, businesses that need it. So a lot of work produced this outcome.
Yeah, so speaking of all that work on the last few weeks shows, we've been talking about the need for municipal leaders at all levels to plan to maximize the funding, not just get the funding. You released your proposed spending plan in early June called Dutchess Invests. Can you tell our audience how you were able to produce a plan so quickly?
Yeah, I tell the story that when I was a village mayor in Tivoli, New York, a long time ago, I used to keep a card in my desk of the top priority projects that our village wanted to accomplish, but never really had the money to do that. So it wasn't my made up list. It was work in our community, hundreds of town hall meetings when I was a village mayor to identify things like the development of our waterfront, the repair of our water and sewer system, accessible sidewalks, enhancements at our park. These were projects that were larger than we could afford at any given time. But if there was a grant opportunity or someone happened to call, and one day somebody did, Governor George Pataki said, if I were to give you 400,000, how would you spend it? I said, I know how. And we had this priority listing. Dutchess County, and so when you're village mayor, you learn to scrap together these things, right? And I think you know this. We have a very sophisticated public outreach structure. Not just the town halls we hold. I've held 185 since becoming county executive 10 years ago. 185 town hall meetings, admittedly 74 of them these last 20 months. But we also have advisory councils. We have supervisors and mayor groups that we solicit information from. And we have, of course, our departments. And our departments look at both day-to-day operation and priority projects that if we could just cobble together enough resources, how might we confront them? I also listen, and I will say another elected official said, I don't want to hear that you listen to everybody. I'm sorry, we actually do. Now, we may not always respond the way you want us to, but we spend a lot of time sort of evaluating data, listening to the public, listening to stakeholders, business leaders, community leaders, elected officials, and we have a sense of what our priorities are. And we've outlined them year in and year out, whether it's confronting criminal justice issues and public safety, or housing and homelessness, or mental health, or simple investments in our assets like our parks and airport. We know that there are, and we have identified what those priorities are. So when $57 million is presented to you, yes, we pulled the card out of the desk and we said, what are those big projects where we can leverage some federal money to either initiate or complete them? We know what they are. And so we identified those. And I know you have some questions about what those buckets are, but these are big priorities, from advancing and expanding our mental health services to addressing housing security, instability, and homelessness, to investment in some of our county parks. We know how valuable and important they are, to public safety, communications, high-speed internet, and infrastructure. So we were prepared, and we developed these ideas with stakeholders, community members who have some skin in the game, have some need or desire or hope or some involvement in solving those problems. And that's how we outlined Dutchess Invest, which I want to offer is it's the guideposts. There's a Poughkeepsie Journal story today, front page, about how we intend to use the ARP money. And I think one of the lines was, well, Molinaro didn't have every dollar, articulated. That is true, because we know what we want to achieve, but we want to work with you, the community, to ensure we have finer details. I just give you a for instance, very simple one. We have a brand new park that we purchased, land in the town of East Fishkill, Lake Walton. We had a general concept of what we wanted to achieve there. We said so: a universally accessible, passive recreation space, a space where everyone of every ability, wheelchair, physical mobility, intellectual disability, could get out into the environment and experience this very interesting and sensitive ecological piece of property. I can't tell you today how much the every kiosk and booth and trail is going to cost, but I can tell you that it's going to be probably about $1.5 million to get the base done, the foundation done. We're going to use some of the ARP money to get that first investment, and then from there will come other investments. So again, we're setting the guideposts and the direction in these buckets, and then we'll create finer detail as we move forward.
Yeah, that's I think that's going to be very important, is to have the priorities set. Can you just talk a little bit about how your team prioritized? We know it's flexible money, but there are some, as you call them, guideposts as to what you can and can't do. What was your process with your team to prioritize how you were going to approach this?
So the federal government could not have made this more complex, and I would say that the detail is not what Congress said it was. So number one, what Congress said this was is they left really the fine detail to the Department of Treasury, and they're still fine tuning the guidelines. And so the federal government, the Department of Treasury, issued basic guidelines. I'll explain that in a second. But even today, they're accepting comments. So if you're watching and you're a municipal official or you're involved in this process, the federal government is accepting comment about how to create finer detail to even the existing regulation. And I think that becomes due either July, it may be tomorrow or July 15th. I think it's July 15th. And so to make it very complex, there's two sort of base categories of federal aid. Number one is recovered revenue. So keep in mind, this is a multi-trillion dollar or $1.9 trillion package that includes hundreds of things that the federal government's funding. The one of the hundreds we're talking about is state and local aid, and the ones of the thousands of that is Dutchess County, right? So we're not talking about the big package. We're not talking about the narrower. We're talking about what do counties in New York have to deal with, and counties have a different sort of responsibility than towns, villages, and cities under this federal package. For county governments of our size, there are two base categories. One, recovered revenue. In essence, reestablishing revenue loss. They created a formula for that. Of the 57 million, Dutchess County's Department of Finance and our budget office, working with our comptroller, identified what within the category of recovered revenue using the federal formula we qualify for, 31 million. We identified 31 million of the 57 as revenue loss within the existing federal formula. That comes into Dutchess County, and I'll explain that in a moment, but that comes into Dutchess County over 2 years with no restriction. That comes into us, it's merely to recover, and the only base restrictions are it should be for general obligation, general government services, and not to offset existing debt service. And so with that 31 million, we have a greater deal of latitude. That's the non-restrictive package that the counties asked for. The balance of that 57 million, you do the math with me, but 31 million is recovered. The balance of that 57 million does have to fall within, future spending has to fall within an established set of categories that the federal government's identified, mostly focused on vulnerable populations and responding to public health and public welfare, community, not welfare, traditional welfare, but public welfare, general welfare within those populations. And so two categories: recovered revenue, non-restrictive, specific future spending, restrictive, more complicated. The federal government packaged this so the counties would get it over 2 years. So of the 57 million, we now have one half of that in a bank account to be used, 28, if I'm right, $28.5 million. Remember, 31 million of the 57 non-restricted. We don't see the full for 31 million. We only get 28.5 this year. We'll get 28.5 next year, with both a percent of that being non-restrictive and the balance of that being restrictive. Got it? I know it's very, very clear. And so we have a very good team, and they identify. And then looking at our priorities, what we've attempted to do, for instance, we intend to build what we refer to as a permanent solution to homelessness. And now that's not giving everyone a house, although we do create a housing ladder, and I can talk about that. But that is a permanent homeless shelter modeled after a program in Bergen County, New Jersey, that's very transitional from you walk in the door, maybe with limited support, and then as we build the relationship and you're willing to come back, you graduate within the very same facility to a comfortable cot, to an enclosed space, to an apartment space. We identify within that particular project certain components that we absolutely are certain fall within the new spending category. And so of that of that $10 million or $12 million project, we're able to guess, based on the guidance, that about $6 million would qualify under the federal guidance, and we'll match that up. And one of the reasons we can't say to you today, well, this dollar will be matched up with that federal aid, is because as we develop each proposal, we'll have to match it against the federal guideline and then determine with them if it qualifies or not. So we don't want to overcommit today, because we're not certain that everything we're suggesting is going to qualify, but we want to be sure that we have the general picture. The other thing I want to tell you is, you asked the question pretty good, establishing priorities. I know that when you go to the public and say, here's all the things we're going to do, and the first thing we're going to do is this, one could easily assume that that's your priority. If I could establish the absolute timeline I'd like to confront these problems in the order I wish to confront these problems, I would have no problems. And my point is, just because we're moving forward with one thing doesn't mean that it has a greater priority or it's heavier weighted in our response. It's the thing we can move forward with now. And as we develop more finely the proposals, as the federal government finalizes its guidance, we're going to marry and match up our priority with their money and then move forward. And then the last I'll tell you is, we will not simply spend the money. I have said many times, and I think you all know, Washington and Albany have a tendency just to throw money at something. If it's broken, let's throw money at it. If it's fixed, let's throw money at it. If it can't be fixed, let's throw money at it. What we've been very good at, and not perfect, but good at, is measuring the expense of the dollar. If we're spending a dollar, what are we getting in return? And so this is not a corny phrase. We don't intend to spend it. We intend to invest it. And with every federal dollar, we want to be able to show that there's some added benefit, that there's something else that's coming back on that investment. And we're very careful and keen on making sure we can do that.
Great. Yeah, I think that touched on a lot of the important points. I think if municipalities out there first need to, look at where they can get the dollars without the restriction, and then once they figure that bucket out, then work within those restrictions to maximize the use. If we can give you a few minutes just to talk about the Dutchess Invest plan that lays out 4 kind of broad categories of spending. I found that to be really interesting, and probably something that can be overlaid throughout other municipalities in the region that are tuning in today.
Yeah. So again, I refer to them as buckets, but you're correct. Sort of the 4 guideposts for our plan, Dutchess Invest. If I was technologically astute enough, I would put it on the screen and you can see it. It's color coded. You can see it at dutchessny.gov. At dutchessny.gov, it's there. And again, it was listen, it was to establish our expectations, but it was also to make clear that this isn't Christmas, right? We're not, or any holiday, maybe, or Hanukkah. This isn't a moment where we just got this money dumped on us and we should all go, come up with new things that we should spend money on. We wanted to confront issues that are big challenges for us, but without some infusion of aid, we wouldn't get to them quickly. And so the 4 basic expectations or guideposts are county parks. Why county parks? 2 very important reasons. Number 1, we own them. They're ours. They have their assets with broad community benefit, and we know that over the last 20 months, county parks have been one of the places that many communities and many people have taken advantage of as a county asset. Number 2, we had an established master plan with expected projects that, quite frankly, we'd have to borrow money. And so if I can avoid debt, then I free up cash flow. And so whether it's Dutchess Stadium, which not only frees up debt service, frees up cash flow, but creates a revenue stream that now I'm taking the one-time federal aid and turning it into 25 years of annual profit, or it's Lake Walton, that, as I mentioned, will be avoiding debt service that we projected. That's cash flow that opens up for me with an immediate investment. County parks, infrastructure, and jobs. And so we're focused on supporting the rebirth, if you will, of our economy. Happy to talk about that at some other time, but we are seeing a rebound in the economy. But there are individuals who need access to getting back to work, and there are employers and small businesses and entrepreneurs who need some help getting back on their feet. And so we're investing in job readiness, in certification training at Dutchess Community College, in micro marketing to assist small businesses market their wares, goods, and products to expand their reach. Water and sewer infrastructure, the Central Dutchess Water Corridor. You probably have walked the Dutchess Rail Trail. You may not know there's a massive water pipe under it. That water pipe moves water from Poughkeepsie in the Hudson River to East Fishkill. One of the problems in gaining access to that has been water storage. Water storage is a value not only because it expands the capacity of the system, but it also drives down insurance rates. And so we intend to move forward with a massive storage facility, which would allow neighborhoods, communities in Wappinger, Poughkeepsie, even Pleasant, as far as Pleasant Valley and East Fishkill, connect to the system. And by the way, drive down your personal homeowners insurance and general liability insurance, which is useful. Public safety and communication and high-speed internet, countywide investment in identifying gaps in service, both radio, cellular, and high-speed internet. And then how do we fill those gaps? And a very sophisticated effort to do that, both public-private partnerships, so we can increase communication among law enforcement and first responders. We can enhance cellular service in the county, which, frankly, needs help everywhere, but we'd like to enhance it in a safe way. And then we know the importance of high-speed internet as the infrastructure of the 21st century, right? That's the highway of the 21st century. It'd be nice if we catch up, and we know these last 20 months how valuable that is. Identified community partners. I think one of your questions relates to that, but community partnerships. This is our work with municipalities, agencies, not-for-profit agencies, and using some of these dollars to advance our priorities, but assist those entities in providing, achieving their goal. And then lastly, kids, youth. And so 13.1 million of this package is going to the development of a youth opportunity center in the city of Poughkeepsie, Dutchess County's centralized delivery of youth services, and the advancement of what we call our Path to Promise initiative, and direct grants to libraries and athletic, recreation, athletic, arts, and educational not-for-profits to assist at the local level, small micro grants, $20,000, $5,000 to advance some activity that kids who were most impacted certainly missed over the last 20 months.
Yeah, what a great, comprehensive. It seems to touch all corners of the county and all corners of the population. Last week, we had Jonathan Drapkin of Patterns on the show, and like him, I know you're an ardent supporter of intermunicipal cooperation. Can you tell us more about the Municipal Investment Grant Program and your thoughts surrounding the leveraging of these funds between municipalities and agencies?
Sure. So the Municipal Innovation or the Municipal Investment Grant, as was morphed into 2 years ago, is not new for Dutchess. We launched this in 2013, I think, as a way to incentivize shared services, consolidation, and government cooperation. And so each year we've been granting about $1 million a year to support intermunicipal projects. Could be a shared highway garage, could be the consolidation of a fire district, which we did, or the transfer of a water and sewer system from a small municipality to countywide service, and countless others. With these dollars, we wanted to magnify that reach. And what we learned in coordinating with towns, villages, and cities over the last 20 months is that they have particular issues to confront that, quite frankly, if we were to face an emergency again, they'd want some support. So we, in communication with supervisors and mayors, certainly we advanced that partnership, and we're adding about $1 million to the Municipal Innovation Grant Program, asking the legislature to do that, in fact, next week, to move forward with $1 million to help us fund everything from generators, emergency generators for town halls and libraries and community spaces, because we know we need those things, to enhancements of accessibility in parks and playgrounds, and again to confront some of our priorities. ADA compliance is a priority through our Think Differently initiative. Emergency response is a priority for us, but to match it up with investments and partnerships with the towns, villages, and cities. And I'll close this answer by just telling you should be very proud of the supervisors and mayors in Dutchess County. We don't all share political affiliation, and let's face it, we've lived through 20 months of, maybe 4 years of really heated political discourse. I think we're on the other side of that, although we're not quite there yet. But even with all of the angst and anger that we've seen politically at the national and sometimes at the state level, and maybe even from us to them and them to us, your supervisors and mayors, the towns, villages, and cities cooperated like never before. And we really left our political issues, our party politic on the sidelines, and really responded effectively. And I really mean this. I said this to the supervisors and mayors, Democrat, Republican, conservative, independent, liberal, whatever they may be. I am truly grateful that we didn't allow any of that to infect our work, and we could have. I mean, there are a lot of disagreements that we might have. But I will tell you that you all should be very, very proud of the relationship, and using the municipal investment grant, we're able to support those municipalities in in advancing some of their priorities.
Oh, thank you, Mark. That was a lot. Did you actually take lessons in how to talk quickly? Because you got a lot in there.
I get caffeinated. I'm highly caffeinated.
So I just want to follow up with, you ended talking about the local governments, and not everybody has a plan. Not everybody has put together that card with the priorities that you have. At this point, what are your recommendations to them as far as how can they come up with a plan?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would doubt that, and truly, I would doubt that not every town has some inkling of what their priorities are. What I would offer is, again, this is my philosophy. This isn't Christmas, and I say it again. This isn't just money being sprinkled on you, and you should go out and figure out new ways to compound cost for your community. I do think that you ought to think carefully about limiting the expectation, right? Lower the expectation. This can't be used for everything everybody wants, but do spend a little bit of time. If you don't have the process we have, spend a little bit of time workshopping issues with your other elected officials, meaning your town or village board. I think that that's critical in a town and village setting. And then as you have sort of basic concepts of where you think the priorities are, test them with your planning and zoning boards or your advisory council for economic development. Or I was just with the mayor of Tivoli yesterday. They've been working on the waterfront development plans since before I was mayor. He's going to advance a project there because he knows it's a massive priority, but he's talking to his local waterfront development committee to make sure they understand it well enough. And so I guess if I'm offering 3 bits of advice, number one, I say this respectfully as an elected official, lower expectations, because everyone is going to have an idea as to how to spend this money, and you're not going to be able to meet everyone's expectation, and therefore you'll create a scenario where people are upset. So lower expectations. Spend some time internally having your conversations about what you think. You're the chief elected supervisor or mayor. What do you think your community, not your priority, what do you think your community's priorities are? I bet you have a few. And then workshop that with your other elected officials and then the appropriate stakeholders. And then throughout that process, I think it's important to have community dialogue. And so as you roll out these ideas or as you speak to them, I think it's important to say to the public, this is what I think. Listen, and then explain why you're taking the next step. But I do think those are good, sort of steps for a town, village, or city, because you have a different structure and a different format and process than we would have.
And last question from me is, if a municipality is interested in getting involved in the grant program that you talked about, how do they go about doing that?
Great question. Dutchessny.gov, Dutchessny.gov. Under the planning department, all of our agency partnership grant program. So that's for not-for-profits, and we are going to have a few of those open up. And for municipalities under the municipal investment grant program, you'll see that. The third category, so we have general agency partnership grant, which we've supported. You have the municipal innovation grant program for municipalities. And then we have what we're calling live, learn, play, create, a 3-prong approach for smaller micro grants to those athletic and recreational and educational and arts camps, things of that nature. All of those guidelines will be available and are available online. You'll find more detail as the days go on. I think this week the Learn, Play, Create grant application will be made available, I think tomorrow. So do look at that. The other I just want to mention, so our planning department is responsible for the processing of the grants, but we have, for instance, our youth council, we have the Coalition for Not-for-Profits, we have our Criminal Justice Council. These are all massive public organizations that include stakeholders. They inform the policy. They give us the the concepts, and the planning department's responsible simply for administering the program.
Great. Sorry, a minor technical glitch there, but I'm back.
So you disappear on us.
But we really want to thank you. I know you have to get off to your next commitment. It was a really great and informative show. As always, you're really on top of this stuff, and I think provide a lot of value for the folks that tuned in today. So again, thank you. Best of luck, and good luck today.
I appreciate it. Let me just say thank you to all of you as well. I say this often, politicians often stand in front of people and say thank you. and it's almost like secondhand. I really mean it genuinely, authentically. Over the last 20 months, I'm exceedingly proud of the residents, businesses, and community members, leaders throughout Dutchess County. You really did step it up, rise to the occasion. And even with a little bit of controversy and turmoil and people's anxiety, we weathered it. Sadly, with a few hundred less residents having lost their lives to this virus. But I do believe we showed what resiliency looks like and found ways to cooperate and to rise to the occasion. So thank you.
Great. Take care.
Have a great day.
Okay, so Jen, you want to take us through some of this past week's latest and greatest?
Absolutely, Jonathan. Welcome back. So in the past week, we got some new FAQs that came out from Treasury. We got a bulletin from New York State as far as dealing with accounting issues. The Treasury is starting to put out information about reporting. So there's a bunch of things that we're gonna hit on pretty high level, but always happy to answer questions. So first thing is the New York State guidelines that came out from OSC. They were talking about really how you're going to record the money in your accounting records. They clarified that it is going to go into the general fund. It doesn't matter where you ultimately end up deciding to spend the money. It needs to be recorded in the general fund first. So you'll record it in general, and then if you decide you're going to do an infrastructure project, you would transfer the money to the capital project fund with interfund transfers. The next thing is, and this is what we had suspected, but New York State has actually confirmed it, there are eligibility requirements for this money. So you can't record it in revenue as soon as you get it. It has to be recorded in a liability, because if you don't spend it by the deadline, you have to actually give it back. And then you would recognize the revenue as you actually incur the expenses. Now, if it was me, I would have put it in a deferred revenue account, which is still in the liability section, but at least it sounds a little different. However, New York State has clarified that they want you to record it in A688, which is other liabilities. So they've given you a specific account. That's where it's going to go. Then once you incur the expenditures, you will actually move it from the other liability account to revenue. And they said to use a 4089, which is federal aid other. So that's on the incoming side. Now we're talking about when the money goes out. It's going to be really, really important. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the reporting requirements to Treasury. But let me just I'll give you a sneak preview. You need to be able to account for every dollar. So it's going to be really important when you are, spending the money, that you are tracking it. And New York has said that they want you to use the existing expenditure codes. They're not creating new codes to track this money. Use the existing ones, with one exception. Because of the ability to spend the money on broadband, they have added one expenditure code called 8780 broadband improvements. Other than that, you're going to stick with the expenditure codes that New York has already put out. Their suggestions for how to specifically track this ARPA money is you can add a digit to an existing expenditure code or track it in a spreadsheet. So for example, if 3010.4 is Public Safety Administration, you could make it 3010.41 Public Safety Administration ARPA. Or again, you could put it in a spreadsheet, which I'm not a big fan of, because then it's an extra step and it's outside of the accounting system and you could lose information. But the key thing is make sure that you are tracking it and that you can, you can tell the federal government, you can tell your residents, you can tell your governing body, anybody, this is where we spent the money. Another key thing to remember is that you're going to have to amend your budget. So unless you actually budgeted for this money, and depending on what type of municipality you are and when you were doing the budget, maybe you did, but you're going to have to increase your budgeted expenditures and your budgeted revenue for this money so that you make sure that you're staying within your budget. So key thing, sometimes people forget this when they get grant money, but really important to amend the budget. That's all the updates on the New York State guideline. Again, OSC put out a bulletin, so it's available on their website for anybody to go access. Next, Treasury has put out a couple of new FAQs. A couple of things I want to highlight off of that is that if you have outdoor spaces that you want to improve, like parks, Mark spent a lot of time talking about the parks. Although parks are not in the specific allowable category, the FAQs provide several options for how you can classify improvements to parks that would fall under the allowable. One is if you are making improvements to parks that are in qualified census tracts. Again, as I've said before, pretty much anything you do in a qualified census tract is going to qualify. So if you're updating making improvements to parks in those areas, you're good. You could also spin it as assistance to small businesses. You might think, how is that possible? That doesn't really make any sense. But if you are trying to help small businesses with outdoor dining and increasing patio space and things like that, that if they happen to be bordering on a park, you could say that you're helping small businesses by making park improvements so they can expand their outdoor dining. Then the last one, which I think a lot of places may fall into this category, is that during the pandemic, a lot of parks got a lot of use because that was where people could go to get out of their house. So due to that increased use, if your parks incurred some damage, or if you have increased maintenance because of maintenance needs because of that increased usage, that you could classify as a negative economic impact of the pandemic, and you could use the funds to repair the damage, you do the maintenance that needs to be done on those parks. So there's a few options, and that is just if you're trying to stay within the allowable expense categories. Again, if you get if you can put it into the revenue loss bucket, then you have a lot more discretion on how you spend the money. So for example, if part of your municipality is in a qualified census tract and part is not, and you want to make improvements to parks throughout, you could say, all right, well, I'm going to take some of this money that's for the qualified census tract parks, and that will be specifically allowable. And then I'm going to take some of my revenue loss money, and I'm going to put that towards making the improvements in the parks in the other areas. That is another way to go. Excuse me. Another FAQ was about backlogs in courts. If your courts are really backed up because of delays and everything that happened with the pandemic, there are options for how you can address those issues, because a backlog in your court system represents what they call a decrease to local government's ability to effectively administer services. And anything that falls into that category, decrease in local government's ability to effectively administer services, then that's a negative economic impact of COVID, and you can address, you can put that into anything you do to address those issues would fall into that bucket. So you can take steps like hiring new employees. If there's new technology that would help to improve the speed and efficiency of how things process through the courts, you could also invest in that. And then there's also a very large FAQ that talks about public safety and how ways that you could structure spending on public safety to fit within the allowable categories. And the last thing I'm going to touch on is that Treasury has started doing webinars on reporting. So everybody needs to be aware of your reporting requirements. If you are a metropolitan city or a county with a population below 250,000 and you're getting more than 5 million in funding, which should be pretty much all of our metropolitan cities and counties in this area, you have a report that is due, an interim report that's due by August 31st. And that's a little bit more vague, but you are going to have to put in some expenditure information. NEUs, so towns, villages, non-metropolitan cities, you do not have to file this interim report. However, everyone will have to file by October 31st a project and expenditure report. And for all of our local metropolitan cities and counties and the NEUs, you will file that by October 31st and then annually thereafter. So you will have annual reporting requirements. And one of the things that they stressed in this webinar is that they want to know how you are spending every dollar of this money. So I've heard a lot of people refer to this as free money. There are always strings attached, okay? You don't get anything from the government for free. There are strings. So this is a big string. Make sure that you have all the detail behind your expenditures so that you can properly fill out these reports and provide transparency. That's what they're looking for. They're pumping a lot of money out into the economy. They want to be able to account for that money. So that's my speed talking version. Go ahead, Jonathan.
There's a lot coming out each week very quickly. I know we're working on here to create a part of our webpage to have kind of a landing page for a lot of these resource links. So we will shoot that out once that's set up. I think that'll be helpful for folks online to be able to go check some of these links directly to the federal site and the state site. So more to come on that. You did touch on in your update a lot of the questions we had. Again, the revenue, Mark touched on the revenue loss calculation. I think, it would be our collective recommendation that should be maybe the first place a lot of our municipalities look, as whatever you can generate from there gives you the most flexibility. But we did have a question of why can't you include interfund transfers in the revenue loss calculation?
Because the theory is that you're looking at entity-wide revenues. And if you earned revenue in one fund and then you transferred it to another fund, if you counted the interfund transfer, you would essentially be including that revenue twice. So you would be accounting for the revenue in the fund that earned it and then also in the fund that received the transfer. So that's why interfund transfers are specifically not included in the revenue loss calculation.
Okay. We got time for one or two more. You indicated that the money should be recorded in the general fund. I think this is for town. Should that be in the A fund or the B fund?
So that one we don't have specific guidance for yet. I will tell you what I believe to be the truth, and New York may correct me. But for towns, if you have incorporated villages within your space, the villages are getting funding directly. And then the town's calculation is based on the town outside village population. So based on that, my assumption is that you would be recording this revenue in your B fund because the folks in the village are already getting funding directly. So that would be my recommendation until we hear otherwise.
Okay, and we do have a handful of questions that I know we didn't get to, but I do want to be respectful of everybody's time, so we'll get answers to you folks out after the show directly on those. Remember, the shows are recorded and saved on the website, www.rbtcpas.com. I think Mark had a lot to say in a short period of time, so if you want to go back and hear some of his points, I think you can go there and it'd be worth listening to again. He always does a great job of outlining where Dutchess is and where they're going. So again, thank you to Mark. Again, next week, we're going to be back, same time. Linda's going to be back, and we're going to spend next week's show going into a little deeper detail on the compliance and reporting requirements. We've had a lot of communication back and forth from, our folks in the towns and the villages, and even at the county level of, single audit questions, how best to do this, best practices. So I think it's going to be a worthwhile show, one a little more technical than some of the others, but I think it's going to be something that will yield you some good information. So make sure 8:30 again next Wednesday, and our special expert Linda will be back with us. A special thank you to our team behind the scenes, Ryan, who stepped in today, Aaron and Tori from our marketing group, and Mike Totoro, our managing partner and our producer. Have a great 4th of July weekend and a great week, everybody. We'll see you next week.